Hi everyone, Samir and Samet here, and welcome back to our Formula One podcast.
Today we'll be talking about the 2023 Qatar Grand Prix.
And this was certainly a very, very interesting race weekend.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we saw a lot of new things this weekend. We
Yeah,
saw the world champion crown. We saw a new face at the front of the field,
yeah,
and then we definitely saw a lot of controversy this weekend.
yeah. So moving on into FP1 then, Qatar was a sprint weekend this weekend, and Verstappen had the opportunity to do something incredible this weekend. He could win his third world championship at the sprint race, such was the gap that he had. And he could actually be world champion going into the main Grand Prix. So it would just be we would just see whether he or Red Bull could do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's highly unusual to crown that's never happened before, crowning a
Yeah,
world champion during a sprint race. So definitely pretty interesting. But
yeah,
going into this weekend, obviously the drivers had to get used to this Qatar track because
yeah,
obviously the last time they came to Qatar was 2021 with a bunch of different
yeah,
style cars. And already the drivers were struggling with the amount of dust on this track because it's
yeah,
so sandy around the track that just so much dust was like off the racing line. So the
yeah,
first few laps was just clearing the track of all that, and then they could properly get into it. But a lot of
yeah,
drivers like Carlos Sainz, Max Verstappen, they were all complaining about how sandy and dirty it
yeah.
was.
I also like some drivers had to get used to this track too because we had some new faces that have never been to Qatar before, like the rookies Oscar Piastri and Logan Sargent, but also drivers like Alex Albon and Nico Hulkenberg have never been here before, so it was an opportunity for them as well to get up to speed quickly
And
with this
Liam
track.
Lawson
And
too.
Liam Lawson, yeah,
Yeah, so definitely a lot of stuff. Even experienced drivers like Lando Norris, he went
yeah,
off the track and hit a bollard actually, and you can just
yeah,
see then even for the experienced guys just how
yeah,
slippery it was in this free practice one session, and it was
yeah,
kind of detrimental because especially during a sprint weekend, this is the
yeah.
only practice session you have. So if you're spending half the session just clearing the track, then there's not a lot of time you can use to actually get like a good setup data and everything.
Yeah, we also saw Charles Leclerc have some issues with his engine going into the pit lane, but he was able to get that resolved quickly with Ferrari, and he was back out on the track as well.
We also saw some of the Williams drivers, Logan Sargent and Alex Albon, both struggling, like going wide
Yeah,
off the track. And then unusually, Alex Albon came on the radio and he said like he complained about his seat being extremely hot.
yeah.
And little did we know that that would be just a sign of how hot it would get this weekend.
Yeah. So come the end of FP1, then it was Max Verstappen who was at the top in P1 ahead of Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc. So both Ferraris were up there right with the Red Bull. Then Fernando Alonso with some good pace in his Aston Martin, finally being up there once again for them. But Sergio Perez 5 tenths off his teammate on the same tires. That's not what he needed after one session going straight into qualifying.
Yeah, exactly.
And then also Yuki Tsunoda was up there in sixth, along with Nico Hulkenberg. George Russell was the only Mercedes in the top 10, surprisingly. Then with Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris in ninth and 10th.
Going into qualifying now, at the
Yeah,
this would set the grid for Sunday's race,
yeah,
and at the end of Q1 we saw Kevin Magnussen trying to get out of the bottom five, but he couldn't improve in the Haas. Valtteri Bottas though, he stayed 11th fastest, and then Liam
yeah,
Lawson also surprisingly couldn't get out of the bottom five after
yeah,
looking so fast in the AlphaTauri in previous weekends.
yeah,
Lawson wouldn't get out of the Q1 for what would be his final race of the season, as Daniel Ricciardo confirmed that he would be returning to Austin next weekend.
yeah,
So this was really disappointing for Liam Lawson, especially with Yuki Tsunoda up there in 12th at that moment,
yeah,
because Lawson is trying to find himself a permanent seat in the AlphaTauri, and so he was delivering, but this weekend he would have to do something special to
yeah.
deliver even more.
Yeah, and we also then saw Logan Sargent, another driver who's at risk for his future, drop to the driver at risk in P15 as we saw Hulkenberg improve all the way up to P9 and Sargent couldn't improve his time. And so now there were drivers behind who were trying to improve, such as Lance Stroll. and Stroll was down there in P19, and he was out once again in Q1. So Lance Stroll not having a good weekend at all, as George Russell went up into P5 up there in the Mercedes, and once again being the only Mercedes in the top 10, as Hamilton was only down in P14. So that was very disappointing for Hamilton, who just couldn't find any pace. And so now Sargent was the driver at risk with just one driver who could beat him, and that was his teammate Alexander Albon at Williams. Sargent never outqualified Albon before, and he could have done it at this qualifying, but then Albon just right at the last second beat Sargent, and Sargent was knocked out of Q1.
Yeah, really disappointing for Sargent there.
Yeah,
Obviously trying to fight for his future, and he had shown how
yeah,
fast he was over this weekend. But
yeah,
unfortunately, right at the end, his qualifying got cut short with Albon
yeah.
out qualifying him.
Yeah, and just overall for Williams, that just wasn't a very promising qualifying for them to be 15th and 16th too. So they definitely had some work to do.
Yeah. Interestingly though, we saw like some in toward the end of Q1, we saw
Yeah,
Fernando Alonso and Charles Leclerc get really close together into turn one, and Leclerc actually dived down the inside of Alonso so he
yeah,
could start his lap, and that ruined Alonso's lap, but Leclerc
yeah,
could get through. So that was like not highly unusual to see. And then something
yeah,
even more strange was that Stroll, who was really mad after he got knocked out
yeah,
in Q1, at the in the garage we saw a camera pointing towards his personal trainer. It was just kind of saying some stuff to Stroll.
yeah,
I think he was just trying to comfort him ultimately, but then Stroll just like pushed him out of the way
yeah,
and stuff. And so later on the FIA would investigate that, because that's not at all what you want to be seeing drivers doing, especially like to
yeah.
people who are trying to help them.
Yeah, that's definitely very unprofessional from Stroll. I mean, I get that he was definitely had a very poor result and not what he wanted, but to push your trainer away, and like with if you looked at the video clip, it was a pretty like strong shove.
Yeah.
So that was pretty unprofessional from him, and something that he probably regrets, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Moving on into Q2, then we saw Max Verstappen being held up by one of the Ferraris. It was, so he was not at all happy with that, and it looked like the Ferrari was actually defending him kind of too. It was Carlos Sainz and just like not letting Verstappen get through. So he was very upset about that.
I mean, yeah, like I don't know how to respond to that, because Sainz
Yeah,
does want to keep track position, obviously, but Verstappen does not like waiting behind people. So
yeah,
I don't know. I mean, like I don't know how to approach that situation, because you're entitled, like you are allowed to keep ahead of a driver, but I honestly for that like felt like Max should have maybe waited for a better opportunity to overtake instead of like complaining about that. But it is what
yeah.
it is.
But going on now to the very final laps of Q2, it was Verstappen who currently then he went straight to the top, 2 tenths ahead of both McLarens who were up there, Norris and Piastri. But then for the Ferraris came to complete their laps, and first was Carlos Sainz, who only went up into P9. So a very disappointing qualifying for him, and certainly one that would put him at risk because drivers like Hulkenberg were improving behind, and Hulkenberg went up to P11, so not quite safe out of Q2. So his qualifying was over. And we also saw Valtteri Bottas, who went up into P9. So Sainz was now the driver at risk. So he was definitely at risk now because drivers behind like Sergio Perez were improving, and Perez went up into P9. So Carlos Sainz was out of qualifying, and Sergio Perez was also at risk too.
Yep, and we saw then drivers filing across the line one by one. Yuki Tsunoda could not put his AlphaTauri
Yeah,
into Q3. He stayed 11th fastest, but he was ahead of the Ferrari of Carlos Sainz, so that itself was already pretty impressive. Esteban
yeah,
Ocon, though, he was coming across the line, and he crossed the line to go 5th, so that pushed Sergio Perez down to 10th and Valtteri Bottas out of qualifying into 11th. And then Lewis
yeah,
Hamilton, who had blitzed the middle sector, came across the line, and he went fastest overall by a
yeah,
tenth to Max Verstappen. And then we panned to Alex Albon, who went off the track at the final corner, and that would we thought would spare Sergio Perez, until we realized his lap time got deleted and
yeah,
Perez got pushed down to P13. So
Yeah,
once again, Perez coming across to track limits, and just really disappointing from
yeah.
Perez, and that would definitely help Verstappen in his bid to get his third world championship.
Also in Ricardo's bid to try to get him a seat for next year in Red Bull.
The more important thing.
Going into Q3 now, we saw McLarens were absolutely flying now. It was Oscar Piastri, the rookie, who went up 7 tenths clear from Fernando Alonso up into P1. But then we saw Max Verstappen doing Max Verstappen things and quickly took P1 back. This time he was 7 tenths clear of Oscar Piastri. So just Max Verstappen doing what he's been doing best in 2023.
Yeah, it was a good lap from Piastri, but even better lap from Max
Yeah,
Verstappen. That probably was tire difference. And then George Russell, because George Russell came across the line, he went ahead of Oscar Piastri, but still
yeah,
6 tenths down on Max Verstappen. Then came his teammate Lewis Hamilton.
yeah.
Hamilton went ahead of George Russell, but it was again 5 tenths down still of Max Verstappen. And then we saw Charles Leclerc, who only went fifth fastest in the Ferrari.
Yeah, so it was not Ferraris were not doing that well as we've been expecting them kind of but McLaren's, it was very surprising to see them and their pace, to see what they've been able to do, but just once again the Red Bulls have just been consistently up there.
Yeah, and we would see when in the final runs of Q3, when all the drivers had new sets of tires to see
Yeah,
where the pace really lied. And towards the final set of runs though, Lando Norris, he went after his first like time, I think his first lap time got
I think he got
deleted,
deleted for track limits.
and
Yeah,
so he went across the line on his final lap, and he went second fastest, 2 tenths
yeah,
or 3 tenths still behind Max Verstappen, who was in the pits. And so Verstappen wasn't even on the track
yeah,
for the final set of runs, kind of like what Sebastian Vettel did in
yeah,
Singapore 2013.
yeah,
So next we saw the other drivers coming across the line. Russell only went third fastest, 3 tenths behind Verstappen. Oscar Piastri came across the line. He was fourth in the McLaren, and
yeah,
that meant as Alonso went sixth, and then Gasly went ahead of his teammate into eighth place. That meant that Max Verstappen would take pole position,
yeah,
with quite an astonishing lap. As then we saw Lando Norris, he basically just got a bit of oversteer on his run, and that sent him wide and
yeah,
over the track limits, and that deleted his lap. So another kind of qualifying like mistake for Lando Norris, and it was highly unusual because that was on his second run too. And so that meant that like during the interviews almost that Lando Norris got his lap time deleted, and so that dropped him actually down, and so that promoted everyone else up
yeah.
basically.
But then we also saw Oscar Piastri during his interview get called for track limits, and his time got deleted, which dropped him down all the way to P6. So both McLarens having track limit issues and dropping down in qualifying. So the final result of qualifying was Max Verstappen in P1, then Russell and Hamilton, after being nowhere in practice, were second suddenly on the second and third row. Then Fernando Alonso was moved up to the second row in his Aston Martin in P4. Then came Leclerc, Piastri, Gasly, and Ocon. Then Bottas sneaking up there in P9, and then Lando Norris in P10.
Now the drivers would do all of it again the
Yeah,
following day, as it was time to set the grid for the sprint race
yeah,
later on Saturday. And going across into the final runs of SQ1, it was a lot
yeah,
earlier in the day than it was for regular qualifying,
yeah,
and so track conditions were different, and everyone was on the medium tire in SQ1. Joe
yeah,
Guan Yu crossed the line. He went up into 11th fastest, as Kevin Magnussen again couldn't make it out of the bottom five, and he went into 17th fastest. Then came Logan Sargent, who was trying
yeah.
to set his first lap time of the session, and Sargent went up into 14th.
Yeah, ahead of Albon. So that was pretty good from him. But then we saw Liam Lawson now trying to do well from P20, and Lawson went up into P9. So very good time from Liam Lawson, ahead of Lewis Hamilton and just behind Sergio Perez. So that dropped Albon now into the driver at risk. And then Leclerc went up into P10, which dropped Sargent out of qualifying. So once again, the American driver just couldn't find a time good enough to get into Q2.
Yeah, disappointing for Logan Sargent. And then we
Yeah,
saw Yuki Tsunoda. He only went up into 15th, so
yeah,
he was way off the pace of Liam Lawson. So the roles shifted at Alpha Tauri.
yeah,
And then we saw Logan Sargent's lap time get deleted for track limits. So Sargent would start at the back of the field as
yeah,
Alex Albon only went 17th fastest. So both Williams out in Q1,
yeah,
and Yuki Tsunoda survived right at the end as Joe Guan Yu couldn't improve his time, and neither could Lance Stroll. So it
yeah,
was disappointment for both Williams there.
yeah. Also for Lance Stroll once again to be knocked out again, and then Kevin Magnussen also in P19 for Haas just can't seem to beat his teammate. But think
Um,
about it for Yuki Tsunoda to be out qualified by that much of a gap
and then
to
his
his rookie teammate.
and then his time got deleted actually. So he was out in Q1, and so
Yeah,
Joe Guan Yu made it through, and Yuki Tsunoda. So many
yeah,
track limit violations this
yeah,
weekend, but Tsunoda again coming all his good work coming undone by that track limit
yeah.
violation.
So now moving on into SQ2 then, and McLarens were looking really quick come the end of the session. Norris was up there in P1 and Piastri was up there in P3 and Verstappen splitting the McLarens there in P2. But we were looking out to the bottom five to see whether they could improve, and Zhou Guanyu was currently last after setting not a very quick time his first go around. But now as he came across the line, he went up only into P12. So Zhou Guanyu would be out of qualifying, but that was kind of to be expected for Alfa Romeo. But then we saw Esteban Ocon go all the way up into P4, so the track was definitely starting to improve now, and drivers had to get a lap in if they wanted to get through to SQ3. But Hamilton could only go up into P6, so it was a pretty risky time because George Russell went up all the way into P2. So Russell once again showing that he's the top Mercedes.
Yeah, and then we saw, I think Hamilton's lap got deleted too, right at the end, because
Yeah,
Hamilton fell into the driver at risk. And then we saw if Liam Lawson could knock out Hamilton,
yeah,
and Liam Lawson couldn't. He went up into 11th. And then we saw Carlos Sainz. If Carlos Sainz could improve his time, he went up into 5th fastest, and that knocked Lewis Hamilton into
yeah,
P11. And then we waited to see if Sergio Perez could improve on his 10th place as Leclerc went 5th fastest. Perez came across the line and he went into 3rd. So that was a much better showing than it was yesterday.
yeah,
And then we saw the Haas of Nico Hulkenberg, who was flying through the middle sector, and he went up into 9th fastest. So
yeah,
that knocked out Pierre Gasly and Lewis Hamilton. So real big shock there for Lewis Hamilton to get knocked out
yeah.
in SQ2.
Yeah, definitely. Also Pierre Gasly too. I didn't expect that from him. So definitely two big shocks there in SQ2.
Yeah.
But moving on into SQ3 now, at the first set of runs, Verstappen was absolutely flying with setting two purple sectors, and he definitely went to the top there. And Sainz could not improve on Verstappen's time. He was like 2 seconds back on Max Verstappen. So that difference between the Ferrari and the Red Bull, it also must be like tire difference as well.
And then again, Verstappen's lap time got deleted for
Yeah,
track limits at turn 5. So Verstappen's good work would be undone as Perez
yeah,
then went to the top of the table, and Verstappen he just slipped wide on one of the high speed
yeah,
corners, and so that undid all his good work. So
yeah,
going into the final few runs, Leclerc pipped Perez by 2 tenths to take provisional pole, but then
yeah,
they waited for the McLaren challenge as Piastri went 5 tenths quicker than Charles Leclerc in
yeah.
the
Wow.
McLaren. Then came Lando Norris, and Norris then went up fastest in front of Oscar Piastri by 3/100ths of a second,
Yeah,
and it looked like Norris would be ahead of Oscar Piastri. And then we waited for the final runs though. Russell went up into 3rd, and we saw Verstappen was flying through the first sector, and we waited to see whether he could go and do what Max Verstappen does. And again, Sergio Perez's lap
yeah,
time got deleted at turn 4. So
yeah,
another work of good work from Sergio Perez that got deleted. So he stayed 4th fastest.
yeah,
And Verstappen, though, after picking some good time through the first sector, couldn't find time through the middle sector. So across the line he came, and he couldn't improve his time, or
yeah.
he did slightly, but it was still a tenth behind Lando Norris. So at the moment, it was a McLaren front row lockout.
Yeah, and we also saw now Esteban Ocon's lap time get deleted too for track limits. So that wasn't good for him as he was now all the way at last. And now we saw the Ferrari of Charles Leclerc looking like he was improving slightly, and so was the McLaren of Oscar Piastri. So Piastri would have to try and beat his teammate to that pole position for the sprint race. But now as Leclerc crossed the line, he went up only into P5. So pretty disappointing result there actually from Charles Leclerc, 7 tenths back from Lando Norris's time. But then we saw Oscar Piastri come and cross the line, and by 8/100ths of a second, Piastri went onto provisional pole. So now it was up to Norris to see if he could beat his teammate. And Norris was doing very well until the final corner where he just ran very wide. And right behind him, right in front of him, we saw Sainz go up to P5. So Sainz won the battle at Ferrari as he went P5 ahead of his teammate. But Lando Norris just backed off right at the very end and did not improve his time after he ran wide. So now it was just Fernando Alonso left to complete his time, and it was only P5 for Fernando Alonso. So that meant that Oscar Piastri was a pole sitter now. I mean, yes, it's not for the main Grand Prix, but he won the sprint shootout, and he would start on pole for the sprint race.
Yeah, that's really like you saw the
Yeah.
pressure there got to Lando Norris there as he
Yeah.
just chucked it into the final corner and
Yeah.
he came out second best to his
Yeah.
teammate, and so Piastri there outperforming Lando Norris, that's definitely going to
Yeah.
take a hit to Norris's confidence, especially
Yeah.
like that's like highly unusual to see Lando Norris making so many errors in this weekend, but I think that shows that Piastri, that just shows how confident and mature he's
Yeah.
driving at the moment.
And now we would wait to see if Piastri could take a win before Lando Norris could. And so the final grid now for the sprint shootout was Piastri, Norris, Verstappen, Russell, Sainz, Leclerc, Hulkenberg, Perez, Alonso, and then Esteban Ocon. After both of them had their lap times deleted and just couldn't get a lap on the board, they would start 9th and 10th.
Yep. So now going on into the sprint race this weekend, and it would be to see whether Verstappen could be crowned world champion here.
Yeah. So at lights out, then we saw a great start there from Oscar Piastri, who just shot off into the lead. And Lando
Poor
Norris.
start from Lando Norris. Oh my god.
Yeah, Lando Norris had a pretty bad start, and he was like the whole field was now swallowing him up. He had Russell to his inside and Sainz to the inside of then Russell, and Verstappen was just coming around the outside. But Verstappen got squeezed out. So going into turn one, then Sainz was now trying to fight Russell, and it looked like Sainz had actually got the move done. But then the outside turned into the inside for George Russell, and he got the position from Carlos Sainz in the Ferrari. So it was Piastri from Russell, then Sainz, and Leclerc was now right up his teammate's gearbox. And further in the back there, we could see one of the Alpha Tauris of Liam Lawson just flying off into the background and off the track. But it was a great start from Piastri, and now Lando Norris was just dropping back because now Verstappen had overtaken him.
Yeah, and it was highly unusual for Liam Lawson because
Yeah.
he had made like so few errors, and
Yeah.
Lawson just overcooked it on the brakes and sent
Yeah.
himself flying. I think it was off the track into like
Yeah.
turn two, and so that was really disappointing there for
Yeah.
Liam Lawson. He would still get another race before he would depart from Formula One for this season,
Yeah.
but definitely not what Lawson would be wanting to do, especially
Yeah.
when he's trying to find a future in the Formula One.
Yeah, so Lawson was out of this race, and Norris had lost 4 positions by the time we got to lap 2 and the restart there. It was the green flag, and Piastri was now under pressure from George Russell, who was under even more pressure there from Carlos Sainz. So the order coming down the main straight was Piastri from Russell, Sainz, Leclerc, Verstappen, Norris, Alonso, Ocon, Hulkenberg, and Perez, the top 10. Perez, Hulkenberg all losing places, and same with Verstappen and Lando Norris. But you could just see them trying to break the toe coming down the main straight. But further back, we saw now Norris under pressure from Fernando Alonso, and Alonso tried to go to the inside of the McLaren, but Norris just broke a little bit later and was able to keep that position.
Yeah, and Oscar Piastri was flying out in front though,
Yeah.
as then we saw Fernando Alonso trying to come again to the inside of Lando Norris,
Yeah.
and that pushed Norris a little bit wide, and two of them were going wheel to wheel. Alonso had the tire
Yeah.
advantage, but then Lando Norris had the racing line advantage essentially, and then we
Yeah,
saw at the front of the field down the inside when George Russell
yeah.
on Lando Norris
Oscar
or on
Piastri.
Oscar Piastri, sorry, yeah, Norris at the front of the field. That's not right. Lando we saw Oscar Piastri fighting with George Russell. I don't know which turn it was, but it was a really late dive bomb from
Yeah,
George Russell, and so that was smart placement of his car there too, and so Russell led the sprint,
yeah,
and that put Oscar Piastri on the back foot, and he was coming under pressure
yeah.
from Carlos Sainz too.
Yeah, so that was and further back then we saw Logan Sargent just lose the rear of his Williams and drop it into the gravel. So Logan Sargent just making another mistake and not what he needed at all. That brought out the safety car and just Logan Sargent once again just proving as to why he doesn't deserve to be in Formula One. He should get ready to learn how to speak Chinese now, heading to Chinese Formula 4. But if he can prove himself in the next few race weekends, then maybe he'll be given a seat for next year because he has shown some pace, but just
Hmm.
not at all like these silly mistakes that at least like it's one thing for him to be at the back, but for him to be at the back and making these mistakes, like if he was leading the race and being put under pressure and he made that mistake, it's fine. He's a rookie, but he's at the back fighting for P17 and he's just dropping it on himself. That's definitely not like acceptable at Williams, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly. Going on to lap 7, then we saw Oscar Piastri fighting Carlos Sainz.
Yeah,
Sainz tried to go around the outside of Piastri at turn 1, and
yeah,
that didn't work out for him. And that battle would continue on as Sainz was trying to put Oscar Piastri under
yeah,
pressure. But Piastri knew he had to just defend against Sainz because
yeah,
Russell's tires would drop off really quickly, and then that would put Piastri right all over George Russell.
yeah,
On lap 9, then we saw Max Verstappen coming under, or we saw Charles Leclerc coming under pressure from his 2022 title
yeah,
rival Max Verstappen, and so Verstappen made an easy move into turn 1 past Charles Leclerc, and Verstappen went up into 4th place, which would help him.
yeah.
If he stayed around that place, he would become the world champion.
Yeah, so moving on to the next lap, then Max Verstappen was now putting pressure on Carlos Sainz, and Verstappen just even before they got to the braking zone was up into P3 and just making more moves again. And also on that lap, we saw Piastri had significantly closed up to George Russell, and he was now putting the pressure on going down the main straight into turn 1. He had DRS and he was closing in, and then Oscar Piastri before they got to the braking zone moved back into the lead of the sprint race, and that would definitely put a smile on his face.
And then we saw Lando Norris make a nice move around the
Yeah,
outside of Charles Leclerc at turn 1.
yeah,
So that was a really good move from Lando Norris. And we saw
yeah,
the soft tires were starting to drop off now. And then a
yeah,
huge crash came. I don't know
yeah,
which turn it was, but it involved 3 cars. It was Nico Hulkenberg, Esteban Ocon, and Sergio
yeah,
Perez. And it was a disastrous crash for Sergio Perez. And that would surely mean that Max Verstappen would
yeah,
become world champion again.
yeah. They were just three wide going into one fast left-handed turn. You had Ocon on the left, you had Hulkenberg right in the middle, and then Perez right on the outside. And you could just see like Hulkenberg was getting pinched, and I think he might have tried to back out because he could see both of them closing in to Ocon just moving right to get that better racing line. Just Ocon could not see that Sergio Perez was right there, and both of them and
Yeah, I think it was turn 2 that it happened.
yeah, Hulkenberg just tried to back out, but it was too late. He got clipped. And then Ocon got clipped, and Perez just the way he was coming into the corner, just Ocon got clipped. He was going like this, and Perez was naturally going left, so they just touched each other and went straight into the gravel. And Hulkenberg picked up front wing damage, so he just beached his ass in the gravel. So yeah, he got sandwiched, and he was definitely the most innocent one out of those three. But yeah,
Yeah, really disappointing for Sergio Perez too
yeah,
after the so many struggles he's been having.
yeah,
Another misfortune to happen to him, and he definitely knew
yeah,
that that would give the championship to Max Verstappen right then and there.
yeah,
And so then again on another restart, we saw on lap 15, Oscar Piastri led them down the straight, and
yeah,
George Russell was following him, and then we saw Charles Leclerc trying to make a move on Lando Norris into turn 1, Leclerc will never back down from a fight, and he made an incredible move down the inside on
Yeah,
Lando Norris into turn one and got him on the exit as they approached turn two. That was a phenomenal move from Charles Leclerc, and then we saw Max Verstappen fighting his way past George
yeah,
Russell into turn one, which looked like the favorite overtaking spot this weekend. Russell got passed by Max Verstappen, and then going on into lap 17, Lando Norris was trying to fight his way through the field, and he went round the outside again of Charles Leclerc, and then he put his former teammate under pressure right then and there into turn two. So Lando Norris was trying to make a fist of it on Carlos Sainz. As now
yeah,
going into turn three and turn four, and Norris went round the outside again. So that was
yeah.
some pretty good moves from Lando Norris.
Yeah, moving on to lap 18, then the second to last lap, we saw Lewis Hamilton putting the pressure on Fernando Alonso and Hamilton getting through on his former teammate at turn one. And then moving on into the final lap now, Hamilton had closed up significantly to the two Ferraris, just as we saw Lando Norris go around the outside of George Russell into turn one, and Norris put himself on the podium there, and Russell just had to back out because of the tires fading. Norris on the mediums and Russell on the soft tires. And then we saw Hamilton trying to get past Leclerc, or he got past Leclerc. He tried to get past Carlos Sainz now, but there was no doing for him. And then we saw Oscar Piastri just cruising his way out into the lead.
Yeah, there was no stopping Oscar Piastri though as he rounded the final corner. For the first time in Formula One, Oscar Piastri won. It was a sprint race,
Yeah.
but he took victory, and crucially before Lando Norris.
Yeah. So great result from him. Great to see from Oscar Piastri. But then behind him came Max Verstappen in P2, and it was a P2 that brought Max Verstappen his third world championship. So an incredible season from him and Red Bull. And Max Verstappen now joined legends like Ayrton Senna and Niki Lauda as three-time world champions.
Yeah, incredible for Max Verstappen. We already
Yeah.
knew he would be one of the greats, but this
Yeah.
just definitely proved it. So Oscar Piastri took victory in Formula One before
Yeah.
Lando Norris, as Lando Norris came in third place. And man, that's really funny. It was a mature drive from Oscar Piastri all the
Yeah.
way from pole to checkered flag, and Piastri has already converted more of his poles to wins than Lando Norris has.
Yeah. But Lando Norris, you have to give it up to him too for the incredible race that he drove to right at the last lap to get on the podium. Incredible from him. And
Yeah.
it's nice to see McLaren once again have found their way and have been competing like this. But Max Verstappen, take a bow. He's three-time world champion.
So it was a great sprint from Oscar Piastri, Max Verstappen, and then good recovery from Lando Norris to
Yeah.
come home on the podium. And then behind him for the points, we saw George
Yeah.
Russell finish his fourth, and then Lewis Hamilton finished fifth, followed by Carlos Sainz, then Alex Albon, Fernando Alonso, and Fernando Alonso got the last point.
Yeah. So good job from him. But now moving on into the main Qatar Grand Prix, and certainly the main event we would see this weekend and see all the drama that it would have to bring. And as the five lights went on and went out, it was a great reaction time there from Max Verstappen, who went straight into the lead from pole position, and George Russell had a pretty poor getaway and that is now being put under pressure from his teammate Lewis Hamilton. And Russell and Hamilton tried to go around the outside at turn one, but then he just drove right into George Russell, and Russell was on the inside and he couldn't really do anything about it. So Hamilton and Russell collided, and both of them went flying off into the first corner, and just this absolute disaster at Mercedes.
Yeah, really, really big disaster for Mercedes, and not at all what they needed.
Yeah,
After starting on the second and third, by the
yeah,
end of lap one, they were running last in one of their cars, and the
yeah,
other car was out of the race. So
yeah,
a huge disaster then for Mercedes, and it
yeah,
would find George Russell with a lot of work to do.
yeah,
And you have to feel bad for Russell there because it was through no fault of
yeah,
his own. Hamilton accepted full blame of it,
yeah,
and it was Hamilton's fault because he just like came too close to Russell, and that
yeah,
caused both of them to spin out. So
yeah,
really disappointing for Mercedes.
yeah. So going on into lap four, then at the safety car restart, then it was Verstappen in the lead from Oscar Piastri, who was in second, and then Alonso was up there in P3 for Aston Martin now. But further back, we could see now Yuki Tsunoda and Pierre Gasly going for it. Tsunoda tried to go to the inside of his former teammate Pierre Gasly, but Gasly just hung it right around the outside, and then that turned into the inside, and he was able to defend his spot from Yuki Tsunoda. But then moving on into lap six, then we saw Sonoda was now under pressure from Nico Hulkenberg, who was trying to make his way through after the disappointments he suffered from yesterday in the sprint race.
And Hulkenberg also had a
Yeah.
penalty because Carlos Sainz had to withdraw earlier
Yeah.
from the race due to problems with his car.
Oh
So
yeah.
Sainz didn't start the race actually,
Yeah.
and Hulkenberg on the way to the grid before lights out, he went and
Yeah.
he actually stopped in what would have been Carlos Sainz's box, and instead
Yeah.
of his, so Hulkenberg got a penalty for that.
Yeah, so Hulkenberg was definitely just trying to chop his way through the field, and he was right now currently running in P9, and then he tried to go around the outside of Yuki Tsunoda at turn 1, and then the outside turned into the inside, and Hulkenberg was able to get the move and move up into P8. Just as now we saw a battle at the back between Perez and Russell was able to get past Sergio Perez up into P13, but that was also a tire difference too because Perez was on the hard tires and Russell was on the mediums.
Yeah, but it was still a good move for Perez or
Yeah,
for Russell regardless. And then on lap 7, we saw Fernando Alonso get a
yeah,
whole load of oversteer and he went off the track
yeah,
there. So that was not at all what Alonso needed as he was trying to
yeah,
keep with the McLarens at the front of the field.
yeah,
And then we saw another great move from George Russell at the same spot he overtook Oscar Piastri in the
yeah,
sprint. He got past, I think it was Valtteri Bottas, and then into turn 1 we saw Lando Norris go around the outside of Charles Leclerc at turn 1. So again, it was literally a copycat move of the sprint. So
yeah,
another good move from Lando Norris. And then George Russell continued to find his favorite overtaking spot, and he overtook a Haas. I think it was at turn 6. So it
yeah.
was a really good move from George Russell once again.
And Russell then also in the following lap was trying to get past Gasly at turn 1, but he just couldn't get past because he was forced off the road. And then he would do that again on come lap 23, trying to fight his way past Pierre Gasly. And this time he got his move done up into P7 now for George Russell as people started to come in and make their pit stops.
Yeah, Alonso came into the pits for his stop. It was
Yeah,
on lap 27, and then as well as Pierre Gasly, and lap 28, Lando Norris came into the pits, and
yeah,
it was a good stop from McLaren as they as Norris exited the pit lane.
yeah,
He would be behind Oscar Piastri, and he would also be behind one of the Alfa Romeos. I think it was Valtteri Bottas probably, and then
yeah,
going on to lap 33, we saw Fernando Alonso go
yeah,
off the track again into gravel, and so he was not at all liking how the
yeah.
Aston Martin was feeling, because then he lost places to Charles Leclerc as well.
Yeah. So another thing that was happening just throughout this whole race was just the temperatures that were at in Qatar during this moment were significantly hotter than any of these drivers had experienced before. Even some people like Alonso and Hamilton who have been around the sport for a long time, the temperatures were insanely high.
Mhm.
So something that we would be seeing were the drivers making these mistakes because of just how hot it was and then fatiguing in the car. And the first one we would see to go would be Logan Sargent after on lap 41 just complaining about like him feeling sick to himself. Also, to be fair though to him, he was suffering from an illness that weekend too, so these conditions were just not helping him. So he tried to tell the team that he could do this and he could continue, but eventually he was brought in, and it was great to see from the team to like give him that respect and say like if you can't do it then just bring it in, like this is not going to affect you because we want you to be healthy and stuff. So it was great to see the support the team was giving him, but this just shows the conditions that these athletes are going through, and
Yeah.
like especially in a hot weekend like this. And if you watch the post race interviews too, you just see all of them having like towels over them and just sweating, and it was insane how hot it was.
After the race, Alex Albon and Lance Stroll were
Yeah,
among drivers who like literally could barely get out of the car. And
yeah,
then Lando Norris reported in the medical center like a few drivers fainted in
yeah,
there because just of how challenging that race was.
yeah,
So if anyone says that Formula One drivers aren't athletes,
yeah,
then they just need to watch this race and they'll completely understand that they are.
yeah,
But anyway, going back onto the race, on lap 45, we saw Lando Norris exit the pit lane and he came out behind Oscar
yeah,
Piastri. So Piastri got the jump, as then we saw Logan Sargent had to retire on lap 40, and
yeah,
you could see like sweat dripping down Sargent's race suit. And then we
yeah,
also saw on that lap George Russell was trying to get more air into his gloves and suit and everything, like just like stretching his arms and stuff because that's
yeah,
how hot it was.
yeah,
But going on to lap 52, then we saw a great move from Pierre Gasly round the outside of Lance Stroll into turn one, and Gasly made his way up into the points. He was in
yeah,
P10 in his Alpha, or not Alpha Tauri
yeah,
anymore, in his
Alpine.
Alpine. And then on lap 53, though we saw Gasly had to give the position back because he had like made that overtake off the track. And as he did that, Sergio Perez came by and he said, "I'll take that place." And Perez got ahead of Gasly,
Yeah,
and he was trying to fight his way past Lance Stroll, who was his former teammate actually at
yeah,
Racing Point. So Perez was trying to find his way past Stroll, but Stroll was
yeah.
defending pretty hard, and Perez stayed in 10th place.
Yeah, so now moving on into lap 55, Gasly was trying to go around the outside of Sergio Perez, into turn one it was, and Gasly was able to get that, and a very nice move from Pierre Gasly to move his Alpine up into P10 and into the points. So now moving on to lap 57, then Max Verstappen had just absolutely controlled this race right at the front with his new special edition helmet for winning the world championship now. He had nothing to lose this weekend and just gave it his all. And Max Verstappen came through and won the Qatar Grand Prix for the first time in his career, and it was a great drive from him.
It's also a great helmet he had.
Yeah,
It was like
very
black.
nice
It was
helmet.
like
Yeah,
navy blue and gold, and then it had like red foam on the inside of
yeah,
it. So that was nice. But then behind them, McLaren continued their excellent run of podiums, and it was
yeah,
Oscar Piastri who finished ahead of Lando
yeah,
Norris. So Piastri cementing himself as the better McLaren driver this weekend, as
yeah,
Piastri came home in second place, and another solid drive from Lando Norris to come home in
yeah,
third place, as both McLaren drivers charged through the field really nicely, and a double podium was
yeah.
a really good reward for them.
Yeah, I also just noticed McLaren, like, they still have their team, like, cheering for the drivers on the pit wall. I thought they, like, banned that or got rid of it.
I think the rule is for that you can't like hang on the fence, but you can like be
Oh,
on the ground and wave your
oh,
hand.
yeah. And
So
Norris, I've, like, noticed how, like, a lot of drivers, they dart all the way to the side of the pit wall, but, like, Norris does it pretty aggressively, too. Like, he really appreciates his team.
yeah.
But then after that, after Piastri came Norris, then came Russell in P4, then came to finish off the points came Leclerc, Alonso, Ocon, Bottas, Zhou Guanyu taking 2 points for Alfa Romeo, and it being actually a double points finish for Alfa Romeo. So a very good job from them, and Sergio Perez coming through to get the last points position for Red Bull. And so a very disappointing result overall for Sergio Perez. Not at all what he needed exactly that weekend, but especially with his teammate taking the title.
Yeah, I think after the race they found out Perez and Gasly received
Yeah.
three 5 second time penalties for track limits, and then Stroll and Albon received two 5 second time penalties
Oh
for
yeah.
track limits. So thoroughly disappointing for Sergio Perez, like you said. And
Yeah.
then it was a really controversial race in this because just the heat and stuff that the
Yeah.
drivers had to go through.
Yeah.
Like some drivers though, like Lewis Hamilton said he enjoyed that physical challenge, and that's what makes them like so highly paid and what
Yeah.
makes them great athletes. But while I agree with that, I think there's a difference between
Yeah.
like challenging yourself and then being unreasonable with it.
Yeah. But yeah, it was overall pretty enjoyable Qatar Grand Prix race weekend. The championship being sealed up now. Were both championships sealed up now? The drivers and the constructors.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, the drivers' championship though definitely sealed up now with Max Verstappen. So a very good result then for him and Red Bull. But that's it for this Qatar Grand Prix episode. And thank you for listening to this episode of our podcast. And be sure to join us next time as we take a look at the 2023 United States Grand Prix. Thank you.